Green Deen, What Islam Teaches About Protecting the Planet, is a book of stories about American Muslims who are involved in the environmental movement. And I really put it through the lens and the filter of different really core Islamic principles, and then also frame it around infrastructure, water, waste, energy, and food, and really create a plain language approach to sharing our story, so that my little cousin who's 8 and his mother, his aunt, my aunt, his grandmother, who's in her 60s, they were both reading it at the same time, and they're not Muslim, and they were getting something out of it at the same time that someone who's a scholar and thinks they know everything about the scripture, but those may not know everything about the people that are practicing it, got something out of it. That's funny. I always think about this. Muslims have been part of the dialogue and have been in the center or not in the center. So I think what this does, is in many ways, is that it takes away the Aqidah, the conversation about creed, into and it puts us into a conversation that has universal consequences, where we normally are so insular and focused on what does this mean for us, or what does this mean for our community, or what does this mean for our religion, or hyper-focused on those things. This gives us a space where we don't actually have to engage in those questions. It's, hey, we're humans on the planet. How do we operate with other humans on the planet? And this is our faith, and it's what we bring to the table to help make sure that we can all live here better. And that's what I think is the value of it. It liberates us from having to disagree with anybody. We don't have to disagree with nobody. We actually are just like saying, great, so you have to drink water? So do we. Okay, let's figure out how to make it clean. Great, you have to breathe air? Awesome. Let's figure out how to keep it clean. I think the notion of the prophetic tradition is the Prophet Muhammad SAW and all of the prophets, their process was to make sure that they made everything better. So they constantly were trying to figure out, how do we do things better than we've ever done before? Consistently better than we've ever done before. That's one idea. And then part of the prophetic tradition was, how do we engage directly, not to shirk back, not to slink away. Most of them were like, they were reluctant prophets initially, where they were like, really? I have to send this message? And so there's almost like this piece of like, we have to be engaged, and we have to provide value for everybody. And so I think that's the sort of a core principle, the core principles in the book. And I think I discovered that after I wrote the book, which I think, because I was running into people and saying, wow, part of this is just saying, hey, we know that we have oil and coal, and we know that we burn gas, and that was really smart and really revolutionary 100 years ago. But it's 2012. We can do better than that. It's not a big deal to say we can let go of the past, and that's really, I think, what Islamically we're really about. At one point we did really stupid things, and we treated each other terribly, but prophets came and helped us work through those things and figure out a map to do better. I think there's all this horse trading that's happening in D.C. around this so-called fiscal cliff, which is basically just they're going to pull the rug out from the entire economic reality and say we don't have enough money to do what we need to do. So I think that as this negotiation goes over and all these different little small negotiations, you're starting to see Obama start to get a little bit more bold about stretching the conversation. So he'll put out something there that's a little bit more radical that will actually piss people off on the left, in a sense, but he's using it as a bargaining chip a little bit with the right. And I think he's going to use the same tactic with some of the environmental issues and climate change stuff. I don't think it's going to become as front and center as we would like it to be, but I think there's going to have to be a conversation about infrastructure in a different way. So it's not just, you can have the conversation about climate change, but what he can do effectively is have a conversation about economic competitiveness, about healthy communities that are reliable communities that feel like they're safe, and then that will create economic activity. You can frame a climate change response by the economic need of creating and building healthy communities, and I hope that he does that. They may not talk about climate change as we like climate change. They'll definitely be talking about sea level rise. They'll definitely be talking about days over 90 degrees. They're definitely going to be talking about strains on the grid. All the effects and the consequences of climate change are going to be part of the normal conversation. We're going to start to have a real conversation about infrastructure And do our governments and our communities, do we actually really talk about infrastructure? We had an election just recently where Romney and Obama scarcely mentioned it. I would say Obama, and I was looking for this, Obama mentioned infrastructure. Romney never did. So governments are automatically going to be thinking about it. And I think as Muslims and as people of faith, we're there. You know, we live in these spaces. We deal with these things. We're dealing with the physical thing, rebuilding churches and rebuilding mosques, all that physical stuff, supporting our neighbors, all that human stuff. That's really the essence of faith. It's really how do you, in a time of crisis, how do you support each other? And then how do you get ahead of that? And that's why I think the Sandy's an opportunity for people to start to get ahead of the next crisis. You know, instead of saying, oh, these uncles aren't going to change or we're not going to do anything, they need to just do things on their own and choose to say, hey, we're going to sponsor iftar for this night and we're going to transform the way it's done. And just make it better, right? Just plain simple, make it work and operate more efficiently. And then save money at the same time. You can do that. So they need to lead by example and not necessarily say, oh, we can't do it. No, they just need to do it. And you know, I think older folks are just tired. That's why they're out of ideas, and so they're actually looking for people to come with ideas. And so that's a big thing. I think the other thing that young people can do is to write a lot and to read a lot and to really become extremely knowledgeable about what's happening. To talk to people in their communities, to ask questions, to really get out there and not be in cloistered, small little communities. And that goes for both sides. And when you think about Muslims, not just the good MSA kids that are trying to get married and become doctors, blah, 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 but also all the ones that are not the good MSA kids, the kids that are hanging out and are oh, it's Ramadan, those kids. Those are the kids that actually need to step up as well. So I'm hoping that this can connect with them and what they're finding out there in their work world and their professional world, that Islam is a very, very dynamic faith, and there's something in it for everyone. Your passion and your interest is embedded in Islam. It's intrinsic to it, which is really beautiful and liberating. You don't have to, divide yourself if you want to be, a productive person. Buy books. If you see people out there writing books, even if you don't read them, buy them. This is crazy. Why don't people support each other? It's hilarious. I think every person that you see that is out there for the community, in terms of Muslim community, really trying to talk about new things and push new ideas, we need to support that. No, even if we don't agree with them, we need to support that. I think our ability to be a protagonist in this world is going to rest on our ability to create stuff, works. Art, music, all that. The cultural production needs to rev up at a high level, and the only way it's going to rev up is if people engage in that, if people support that. So I think the most thing I would say is support the folks in your community that are trying to think and do things differently. Me and my wife, we have this goal of going zero waste, and that really makes you hyper aware of what you do and how you live. This idea that I've been throwing around, and this is the first time I'm using it. So if your viewers are listening, don't steal it. It's my idea. It's called Be Halal Rich, right? So when we're halal rich, it's basically like Prophet ﷺ was the richest man on the planet, but he had nothing. He could have done anything he wanted, but he had literally physically nothing, no possessions, no attachments to these things. So I want a generation of people to see themselves as, how do we get rich beyond any kind, a dunya rich and halal rich, but rich in a way so that we don't need to prove it. We don't need to get big screen TVs. We don't need, to buy so much junk. We don't need to contribute to this thing. So there's a framework that was used in a book called Garbology. It was called, it's an incredible book, and I encourage everyone to read it, called Garbology. Edward Humes is the author, and he used this framework called, we all know reduce, reuse, reduce, right?
Recycle.
Reduce, reuse, recycle, right? General framework. He says we need to put in a new word there, and it's refuse. Refuse to even engage in that conversation. Don't get into that cycle. Just refuse. And that's what I think we need to all do. We need to refuse. So my wife has a rule. If I want to get a new pair of sneakers, I got to throw away an old pair, right? If I want to get a new pair of jeans, I got to figure out something else with that old pair of jeans. Start to institute very simple rules in your life so you're more mindful of your possessions.